So we are here. We're ready to go. This is episode 6 of 11 Named People. I'm Sean Jacobs, and with me is my co-host Tony Karen. This is a stream about football. That's basically it. The show is named after something the English historian Eric Hobsbawm once wrote. That is that the imagined community of millions seem more real as a team of 11 named people. So this is called 11 Named People. Formalities out of the way. Today we want to talk about basically two things. One, the Amazon series All or Nothing Arsenal. Tony's really excited to talk about this. And secondly, why Israel, where its military has killed more than 50 Palestinians in the last week in its latest assault on Gaza and the West Bank, has not been banned from international sports yet. Today is also the first time that we have a guest, and I'm going to bring him in right now. There he is. Welcome to the show.
Thank
That's
you.
Will Youmans. He has the misfortune of being an Arsenal fan, and he has the fortune, I suppose, of being an academic. Will is an associate professor in the School of Media and Public Affairs at George Washington University in the American capital, Washington, D.C. He's also the author of the book An Unlikely Audience, Al Jazeera's Struggle in America. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about his Arsenal stuff. So why don't we, I think what we should do is we're gonna start talking about Arsenal. We're just gonna do it like that. And let's start with like you don't have to give away your full thing, but just like your reaction. I don't know how many episodes everybody watched, but what's like your sort of your general feeling about this Amazon series? Let's start with that. Let's give the guests. Let the guests have the first go.
And yeah, he's an Arsenal fan.
And he's an Arsenal fan.
Yeah, it comes with a lot of misery. When I started this series, I had to turn it off. You know, the first episode, I had to turn it off after 10 minutes. I was just thinking, I can't live through this traumatic experience again. But I was motivated by by what a lot of the social media chatter was, you know, about the sort of like being in the locker room and behind the scenes in terms of the management and the business, and then also how Arteta really was trying to navigate these new challenges in a new season. And so when I was reading what people were saying about it, I kind of got back into it. And you know, for the most part, I could do without all the social media or chatter that's being represented in the series. I could do without the sort of reactions of fans because I kind of experienced all that. I lived through all that. Where I find it the most valuable is like where the sausage is being made. And I remember the ups and downs of the season well enough that I don't want to experience all that again. But for me, I'm enjoying the series overall. I'm also working on a documentary, and I've been thinking about all the limitations of documentary as a sort of medium for capturing these things. You can see how tightly access was controlled, and it's in part a PR engine, and it's one of the things that I regret about it. Like every sort of reality TV show, it's constructed and artificial, and I feel like certain players are being misrepresented, and we're not getting their full voice. Like Aubameyang becomes a controversial figure towards episode 4, and I remember that spell. But we don't hear enough from Aubameyang to justify the sort of representation of him. And so there's aspects of it that deeply bother me, you know. And of course, there's a bias towards English speaking players. Maybe some players didn't feel as comfortable being subjects, and so there's huge problems I see. But I try to glean whatever I can in terms of the positives, the insights into the way the club operates.
I mean, my overall take on that show is exactly the same as I had when the absolutely cringeworthy Liverpool, like whatever that Brendan Rodgers Liverpool documentary on Fox, same kind of series, which was just like I wish I could unsee that, because after that I realized that Rodgers was a complete idiot, and basically, but yes, these things are PR exercises. I was mocking Sean for making me watch this, like, because for me this is almost like the digital era version of a match day program. It's like the official version of something. The best football documentary about English clubs I've seen in recent years was the one on, I think it's on Netflix, called Sunderland Till I Die.
Oh yeah.
What I love about that is that it really captures how the club fits into the social texture of the city. And that's completely absent in in this documentary. There's no sense of who the fans are, why they are. There's no sense of almost what the club is, what it means, not only what it means to anyone, but by the way, they're also as if they're protecting trade secrets. You never see anything about how Arteta wants them to play. Not
right, to Will's point, not
like,
to interrupt you. But Will's point about saying how the sausage are being made. You can continue, Tony. But I had a feeling, I never really found out how the sausage was made, except about how they got rid of Aubameyang.
No, that's absolutely right. It's superficial and controlled, and that is disappointing. I think if you're a club like Sunderland, maybe it's easier to expose yourself to documentarians because, hey, someone's actually interested in Sunderland. Arsenal's a mega corporation. As much as I love it, and it comes from that PR world, and the owners are the heirs of the Walmart chain.
Yeah, in fact, you can't understand Arsenal's current predicament unless you understand the ownership. Like that would be, if you were making a proper documentary, that would be essential.
And the owner, the son of the owner, he appears like briefly. So you assume, okay, in the setup, I think in the first episode, you're like, okay, it's gonna be like, who's gonna be like the characters? So the characters is maybe it's this. I think his name is Josh Kroenke. So I thought, okay, this tall guy, bearded. It's like he's a character, so he's gonna sort of explain perhaps to whoever's watching this, and that's also a question of mine, like who is this made for? So whoever's watching this, he's gonna like give the view of his family because they were super unpopular. I mean, to your point about like I didn't want to hear the fans vox pops anymore because there's so many fan channels on YouTube.
And
Arsenal is like Arsenal fans are like the kings of that genre.
AFTV.
So AFTV. They hate him. They hate the Kroenkes. Well, until recently. I think after this first win, they all love the Kroenkes again. But so I was like, okay, is he like a character? He's going to be a character. He hasn't appeared ever since. He was in a taxi going somewhere, saying something about there's a misconception about us, and then I never saw him again. He has not been part of the series. But I want to ask a couple of questions quickly about a couple of things. One is this question of like, who is this made for? So there's a, and I'll just say this quickly. There's a feeling, one, that it's like made for somebody who doesn't. There's no history. There isn't much history in this thing. So I think they assume you know it, or they're trying to make a new narrative, and then they have, apart from those like random fans who's unlike the Sunderland show, we never go to their houses. We went to like this one shot in like a barber shop, but that's it. But for the rest, we never meet them. They just stand in front of the stadium. You may as well have watched the YouTube channel. But then they bring in this guy like KSI, who I wouldn't have known who that was, except I know my 12-year-old son watches that guy's like sort of pranks YouTube stuff. And then Chunks, who's this like, I think Somali British guy, another YouTube personality. They are like the voices of authority, if there's kind of some kind of voice of authority. And the only other person is like Thierry Henry. I couldn't figure out like, who are you making this for, and what is it you're trying to like?
No,
like,
you're revealing nothing about it. Like if I'm thinking, let's make a documentary about Arsenal, I might start with like a montage of images of, say, Sadrist protesters in Baghdad, Somali gunmen in Mogadishu, protesters somewhere in like East Asia, all wearing Arsenal shirts and ask why, right? That's an interesting proposition. Like, what does the symbol mean to people in Africa? And I mean, I don't know if this is the moment to talk about, like, Thierry Henry actually points at something like, Sean and I often go back and forth because I have I'm in Liverpool for life since 1974, but I do have a soft spot for Arsenal. I've watched them at home at Highbury more than any other English club.
Wow.
And I watched the Liam Brady team like back in the late 70s and early 80s, and I watched them in the early 90s. And so, okay, two things about that. Can I have
Go ahead.
Yes, there's a beautiful story in here that connects with that, right? Thierry Henry in the series actually is the only one who says, hey, by the way, Arsenal is a black team. It's a black club. That's what actually gives it its identity.
Mhm.
The 1990 team that I was watching, Paul Davis, David Rocastle, Michael Thomas, that midfield evoked the old soul classic, young, gifted, and black, right? That was unusual in England at that time. In London, that was very unique. That was creating the identity of the club. And then we also know that in the mid-90s onwards, Arsenal also became an African team. That Kanu in particular, Bissan Laurent, Aleda Adebayor, it's a team where like star African players and
making world so happy,
etc. But that connection with Africa. But what I want to say, just going back to my Liam Brady, David O'Leary, Pat Rice, Sammy Nelson, Pat Jennings, Frank Stapleton watching experience on the North Bank, is like Arsenal, when I first started watching them, were an Irish team.
I didn't know that.
But. Okay, I mean, you're talking about 5 or 6, like, and Terry Neal was the manager. So, like, really, like, strong Irish identity. Now, what's interesting to look back on is that Irish in London in the 1970s was kind of like blackness. And the story I wanted to share was from my good friend and lifelong comrade, Father Michael Weeder, an Anglican priest in Cape Town. When he's sent by Tutu because things are getting a little hot for him with the regime in South Africa to spend a few months in London, and he's preaching in King's Cross, and the congregants take a liking to him. There are all these guys from Barbados and other Caribbean countries, and they come for a drink with us, Father. Let's go for a beer after one Sunday service, and they walk, and they walk, and they walk, and they walk. And this is London. There's a pub on every corner. So they walk past about 50 pubs. They walk for 45, 50 minutes until the area around Highbury, and they go into one of these little Irish pubs, and they're sitting down and having a beer. And Michael says to them after, hey, like, tell me something. Why did we walk past all those other pubs to come to this one? And they said, because these are Windrush generation guys, right? Caribbean immigrants to London, in racist London in the 50s. When we first arrived, the Irish pubs were the only ones that would serve us.
Wow.
That is Irish London. That was what. So Arsenal, that's the soft spot. Okay, I confess, and I will.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Sean doesn't get that soft spot.
No, I didn't say that. He's being harsh on me. He's being harsh on me. I recognize this kind of, this story of Arsenal as, I mean, we spoke about this before the program and we were recording. I mean, I also remember Liam Brady and Niall Quinn, who briefly also, by the way, played for Arsenal. So, like, I do recognize David O'Leary, that kind of Arsenal as this kind of immigrant club, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm actually currently reading a book about kind of a modern history of Ireland, and you see that in that book. Uh-huh. And I want to just, for the sake of people listening, I want to read the full Henry quote. He says something like, "It's the club of the people, the street. Arsenal was the first club to have black players. It represents the mass of the UK and how London is." I like that quote. And maybe I was being flippant about KSI and Chunks, but that's that kind of like black African immigrant sort of like impetus. I mean, that's AFTV. I mean, the thing about not to if we want to talk a little bit about the fan thing that we sort of said, like, we didn't need them in that documentary the way they were shot, because we could watch better versions of that kind of interview. But I think that what AFTV, for example, proves to you is like how much Arsenal is a black club, is a club of like, Arab kids, Indian kids, immigrant kids. And if you compare that, this is not to like slight them, but if you watch like the fan TV of some of the other English clubs, it's not the same. No. Redman TV is white. Many of the ones from like Man United, from Manchester City, those are they still have a very sort of like an old school idea of like what is an English football club. And I think to your point when you said who does the program focus on, and language may have been part of it, but there's also a reason, and there's also a way in which the program constructs like except for Arteta, it's an English club. Like the people they picked or British, or even if you want, they did extend it to some Scottish players, but it's very limited about that. Would you agree with that, Will?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the thing that annoys me. I was actually thinking about how Arsenal, on top of what you were talking about, the history with the Irish and black and then African, Also, I mean, I think 4 or 5 years ago, it probably had the most Muslim players on it as well. Mustafi and Shaka, obviously Shaka's still there. And then
Marwan Shamak.
What's that?
Marwan Shamak.
Yeah, in the early 2000s and 2000s. And Samar Nasri as well. It's for me, that's part of what drew me to Arsenal, is that cosmopolitan sort of history, and it's totally just glanced over, in this documentary. And so I think you're making some terrific points. I think AFTV does allow for more depth of that fan relationship to the club, and here it gets all sort of flattened in the documentary into sort of silly social media chatter, and it almost is, it takes the perspective of like the ownership. Oh, here are the fans, they're irrational and they're pithy, and there's just like, if we win they're happy, if we lose they're upset, and there is some truth to that, because I think right now the spirits of the fans are a lot higher after how much money the ownership put into it, and but yeah, I would like to think that there's something more to it than simply just the money and the investment, and something about the identity of the club. But there's also just a battle for the soul constantly going on, and that's also not really represented in the film. So or in the series, it has that kind of corporate PR shallowness to it. But it's hard not to be excited about the positives that we saw, like the reliance on youth and the development of the academy players and the front lining of them. And, Arteta is a club legend and has that fire to him. And that's something that's apparent to any fan without seeing this series.
Which is why let me get to Arteta, but let me just, before I want to ask about Arteta, and I'll have my chance not to give you my review on Arteta, but I just wanted to say this quickly. It is interesting just about the corporate nature of the program. So there's like a moment in also the first episode where there's a throwaway reference to Paul Kagame, and it's just quickly, the Rwandan president, who's a great fan, he also tweeted and said, "I'm upset about losing." And that's the way that it's dealing with what is this larger question of like the Visit Rwanda thing on the sleeve, and that there's been a little bit more journalism. I think the Athletic ran like a really big piece on this, that there's been very little discussion about that in relation to Arsenal. So I thought that was interesting that they just did that quickly. Like your point also about like the identity of the footballers, like their religious, their cultural backgrounds. They just like flattened that out.
Yeah.
And similarly, I think they just didn't want to deal with this problem currently of a club that's carrying like a sponsorship logo of a government, which, by the way, also Visit Rwanda in this context. Priti Patel, the kind of their Home Affairs minister, Minister of Immigration, they're trying to get rid of people fleeing wars and persecution by sending them to Rwanda. So they made this program now. It was just interesting that there was like zero references to that also, which adds to this point about the corporate nature of the programming. Yeah. But let me get to Arteta, because I know we've all got something to say about him. I'll say what you said. He was a club legend, the greatest ever. So how does he come across to me? Okay.
Maybe legend was the wrong. What was this?
That him as a player, the poor man, Javi Alonso.
If he thought that this was going to like bolster the way of his like reputation as like, I don't know, some kind of genius or interesting person, no. He comes across like he says these kind of weird things like, "Hey, let me draw you a picture on a wall, like a brain. Like, let me draw you like a smiley face, and then let me draw you like a heart with a smiley face, and then a brain with a smiley face. Oh, what do you see? A duck or a rabbit?" Just like after a while, I was telling Tony, like after a while, I started fast forwarding his pre and post game, like homilies that he was giving in the.
I don't see how that motivates players. I mean, most of the time, I'm empathizing with the players who sometimes, they're professionals, but they're going week in, week out. They're losing tons of games. The fans are turning on them, and then, Arteta has an approach that sometimes seems like either he goes full cognitive approach and he sounds like a very boring sort of lecturer, and that's his raw
Dale Carnegie or something.
Yeah, exactly. And then sometimes it's almost like a hippie approach of let's feel our energy and
let's rub hands together. Let us rub our hands together.
It's like
blow bubbles.
If you watch this thing, what they're inadvertently revealing is there's this endless huggy, everybody's high-fiving everybody all the time, and all this motivational crap. And then you actually look, when they come in on the faces of the players, you can see the players half the time when Arteta is talking have no idea what he's going on about and why he's making these drawings. And like
Lacazette looks confused.
And then the older players are looking at him like, really? Like this is like, how stupid do you think these players are? Xhaka, and
Aubameyang. I think Aubameyang. I think, and I see Willie's like what is it, biting at the bit or something. But like Aubameyang, and again we'll get to Aubameyang after this. But Aubameyang, I think, was so in on. It's kind of almost like, what is up with you? And you could see that time in the dressing room when Aubameyang is like joking. They're like in an away game, and there's like a sound system, and Aubameyang says something like, I don't like, let's hold hands and blow bubbles. You have the day off, or something like that.
Yeah,
like he was totally making fun of that kind of approach. And I don't know, maybe Arteta took that personally, like, yo, you why you like making fun of me? And that's why he
what if that moment was what broke the camel's back?
Yeah, you making jokes of me on top of me being like, but I don't know. I couldn't figure out why he's some kind of genius coach.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay. Just to before I try to speak to that, which I can't do, so I'm buying time. I want to just point out one thing about the heart drawing and the brain drawing and stuff. And what's amazing is he started off in a way that I thought had so much promise, because he opened up and he talked about him being born with a heart condition and requiring all this treatment. I thought he was going to turn that into like something motivation, like properly motivational, but then he turned it into this really bizarre drawing. And it doesn't seem like he's planning things out when he gives these raw moments, but I don't know. And so it's hard to evaluate him as, and like to speak to their question about the genius. As I was watching this show, I told my friend, I can't tell if he's like a genius or a buffoon. And part of it's like, if they're not showing too much about the details of what he's thinking about tactically, it's hard to really assess that. But if you go outside of the documentary series and you look at the way that the squad is progressing, and the way that he's tightening up the play, and the way he's, I just think tactically there is something interesting going on with the team, and I think that they're going to do much better this season. And I think Arteta, he's borrowing and he's kind of copying, pasting from Pep, from Wenger.
He definitely is doing a Pep.
I mean, every one of those great coaches was copying. Pep was copying and pasting from Cruyff, and Wenger was, Amigo side. We know all the sacred source.
It's not as animated as Pep, so that you can actually follow what he's saying, which as a result makes him look worse. He comes across like more crazier than Pep, because you couldn't always hear what Pep was saying because he was shouting, screaming, spitting, whatever. So with this, you can actually see a little bit what this guy's saying, and I think this, because as you said, we don't actually see. We see him move those little things around on the board. So obviously he has tactics, but they don't want to show us any of that. They show us a little bit of it.
It's like players when they're doing this on TV.
Why are they keeping it secret? When there was a moment, Ben, who's the young defender, Ben White, when he gets interviewed by that coach about his tactics, that guy tells him something like, "This is how you play." And I was like, they're gonna show us something about defending, but they cut it. So like you were like, oh, okay, we didn't really.
I don't think there's any doubt he's a Pep disciple and he's a cerebral coach. And the most honest player and one of the most interesting of the interviews in this, two of them actually, Saka and Tierney.
Yeah.
And Tierney, I love the fact that Tierney talks about class. He's working class.
What
that meant. But also Tierney says, I've never actually seen the game in the way that Arteta's made me see the game.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's not going to make that up. Like, that's real.
And then I would like for you to show me that. And to his defense, now I'm going to actually defend Arteta. That night when they play Liverpool in the first of the two quarterfinal or semifinal of I think it was the FA Cup or something.
Yeah.
And they go to Liverpool. Xhaka gets sent off in the middle, I think, of like the first half, 20 odd minutes in, and then they play with 10 men against a team who in every position is better than them and draw the game. So it's like, obviously he knows how to coach. So I don't know if it's with these kind of series, like how do you make, like, to your point, like how this was edited, because that was your sign where you're like, okay, this guy can coach. He took a team up to to go into Liverpool and play there, it's hostile.
Yeah.
To go there with 10 men and pull that off, that's great. So with the series, I think this doesn't do him justice at the moment.
It doesn't do it justice. Also, where I think he's special is in what seems to be at least player development. And maybe because when he was a player, there was so much focus on sort of like player psychology. And it's not all Arteta. It's like people around him, like Carlos Cuesta, this sort of like minder who pays attention to their psychological state, gets to know the players, but then also even in some of his like loaning strategy of youth players. And there seems to be some attention there to developing young players rather than just sort of buying ready-made players. And there, I don't know, there's something about that and the faith he puts like in Martinelli, in developing Saka, and there's something to that, I think. And it's not going to be reflected in the series because the series is over one season and they're not showing like the interpersonal interactions of the manager Arteta and individual players. So we kind of miss that over the long haul.
Right. Mourinho in this, I would say Mourinho, the series with Tottenham, Mourinho got a better. Mourinho's relationship with like different players, I think, played out. You could was the defender who played in Portugal when he was much younger for Tottenham.
Romero?
No, he's an English kid. He played like some of his youth football in Portugal, and then he came back. I think he plays in the English national team. He's at the heart of Tottenham's defense. I forget his name now, but there's like a couple of scenes where him and Mourinho talks Portuguese. Mourinho and Harry Kane. So there's like in that series they gave Mourinho the myth of Mourinho as this like coach who does the man management. So Mourinho got that. I think the same did in that Leeds series with the Argentinian what's his name, the great Argentinian coach who got fired eventually. But in Leeds also had an all or nothing type series, and he did great. He similarly had a really good thing. But I want to talk about one other thing before we move on, before we talk about the other subject today. Of course, the series also had to have a villain. It had to have a villain, and the villain in this case was going to be Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. I mean, when we first see him, he pulls up in like this kind of like flashy sports car. He's wearing gold. Somebody actually, as he steps out of the car, I think it's Lacazette or somebody says, "I see you got the matching gold, the gold of the car, and the gold of your clothes." So of course, Aubameyang, the setup is like flashy guy, flashy car,
stereotypes.
Yeah, and so he's the guy. Like, I mean, he's gone now. But for the first couple of episodes, my feeling was like if every series needs like the main character, like the hero, which in all these series I think is the manager. Arteta gets that job. Then there's this kind of young players, like you said, mostly English, Saka, Smith-Rowe, Ben White. The villain is weirdly it's going to be like the foreigner. It's like it's interesting that the villain is the foreigner and it's a flashy foreigner. But I wanted to talk. I
want to
think about that story. Both of you, what did you think of the story of the Arteta versus Aubameyang and how that kind of played out?
Well, Okay, just a couple of things about Aubameyang. I mean, look, Arteta and the way that thing plays out, I don't know, we're showing like a McKinsey HR version of like, and it's like, this is nothing pretty about this, but as people say, yeah, Arsenal is a corporation. This is what corporations do. And they're all, essentially, it's all for the lawyers because they're going to break the contract, whatever. So, I get that. It's like the chemistry between Arteta and Aubameyang clearly not there. But I think that speaks to something else we were talking about earlier. Arteta is a very young coach, and clearly the senior players don't take him that seriously. So that's not only Aubameyang, but it's also Lacazette and it's also Xhaka. You can see there's an element of distance. Now, with Aubameyang, I think there's a second level of something we need to think about, and I'll put this provocation out there. Was Aubameyang ever really wanting to be at Arsenal, or was Arsenal a place that he landed when his expected moves to the top tier, i.e., Real Madrid or Barca, which we all suffer with the idea that we all know, however, wherever we are in the English league, at least until now, until people start to figure out that Barcelona might be a bit of a Ponzi scheme. But until then, there's always the sense of like, yes, but if they come in for you, that's where you want to be. That's the ultimate measure of your success as a footballer. And I always had this feeling that Aubameyang landed at Arsenal because it was kind of a consolation prize. He was never really he was not Thierry Henry. He was not somebody who loved the club and was part of it. And so this was almost like it was a holding pattern until his next opportunity came, and now he's at Barca. Anyway, that's my.
Yeah, I agree with that to some extent. Aubameyang, he was so popular with the fans, and he has this like sort of like charm to him. But I would have to agree that he had the aspirations. I mean, look, it doesn't help that I'm going to go visit my father in Barcelona like on deadline day.
Yeah, that was weird. That story just didn't sound right. Edu made a joke, right? What did he say? He said we all live in Cinderella or something. Yeah. I can't remember. He made.
By the way, how good does Edu come out in this document?
Well, very well.
I mean,
he actually clearly didn't support getting rid of Aubameyang.
Yeah, he was torn on it.
Yeah,
and it's hard. I mean, you go from being captain and the best player on the squad to just getting totally sidelined for disciplinary, and it's a tough call for any manager. And I think they kind of at least nodded towards that. I don't know if those moments where they're walking after some of the meetings, and it seems like they don't know the mic's on, but then they're walking past the camera. It's supposed to be like this candid sort of moment about it. I don't know if that was totally staged or not, but it did seem like that there was some some torment over the decision. But if it rippled in the locker room, you don't really see it. Lacazette is his close friend. Lacazette takes the armband afterwards.
But you do well. You
never gets asked. You never gets interviewed.
Yeah, exactly. And you can see he's not happy. And then also one of the players in the treatment room just inadvertently says, "I hope Oba comes back."
Yeah,
we all liked him or something, like we all miss him. We liked him. I thought that was it. I want to make two quick points on. I'm going to start saying Oba now. Oba. So because apparently that's how the Arsenal fans say it. I'm in on the Arsenal speak now. But the one thing is to piggyback on what Tony said about where he was supposed to land. So here's a guy who was at Dortmund, where he plays. I think he plays for Thomas Tuchel.
Center forward too.
Yeah, he's like scoring like goals. I remember watching those highlight reels of him like making those once he scored, he makes his celebration. So he's like a star. And he's playing Champions League every other week or whatever. So now he's gonna go to this club. Sorry, Will.
We were getting Champions League when he showed up.
2016, 17?
Yeah.
So maybe the one time.
I think we had a couple after that. I don't remember.
I love the word couple. Couple was the other day. So anyway, he comes to this club when now he's in the middle of the table.
Not middle. I mean, upper.
I'm like piling it on. No, I'm just trying to. What I'm trying to say is like
he's also not playing his preferred position. He does.
He puts him on the wing somewhere, right?
Yeah.
He puts him on the wing,
and we have no one who can give him a through ball.
Exactly. So like, I would imagine I'm not like that young anymore. This is a club, by the way, that does care about younger players. They invest in that. That's their that was Wenger's thing. So if you're this older player in a club like that, I think you feel out. And then he has this like weird thing, which is like he does have the old man in the club thing going on. He's like dressing like trying to dress like a young kid or whatever. That is why he wouldn't. People are gonna get annoyed with you after a while. And I just saw today, Tuchel said something like, it is known that he arrived, he would arrive late for meetings. So Tuchel would like I don't know, I saw this somewhere on the internet. They would like lie to him and say the meeting starts at like 10 to, and it starts at 10 past. So Tuchel managed that element of thing, and he scored goals. So it's weird. Like I feel this was a case of like a player got old. They got to move on. Mikel Arteta wants to make a new team, put his stamp on it. He's got Saka, Smith-Rowe coming through. That's his team. This guy is not his team, and he's a
leftover.
And I will say this also, and this is my last thing on him, on Aubameyang. I wouldn't, he's in African football, he's not a controversial character. He plays for Gabon. There's been some stories about like how politically he's kind of you can't say right wing. He's sort of like very traditional conservative politically in his own country, which is an authoritarian government. So add to that the sort of like flashiness of him, the sort of like, and they made that point of trying to tell us he's irresponsible and he's flashy. He's just you're not gonna like him. I did feel for him, however. His mother got sick and he went to see her, and they made a thing out of that. And unfortunately, Arsenal, by the way, also lied when they said he was like partying or something. This was during the last Cup of Nations when he had COVID. So there was a lot of spinning against him, which I feel bad that he never had a chance to tell his story.
That's right.
He looks bad. Unfortunately, he comes across as like the worst person in this whole thing.
And it's sad because his personality always seemed from a distance at least so likable in a way, so personable.
With an eye on the clock, I want to talk about someone else, Paul Pogba. Not because of United, not because of his relationship with the various coaches.
He also has a bad documentary, but let's move on.
No, we'll completely ignore all that. Paul Pogba today tweeted support for the children of Gaza, for the people of Gaza. May Allah protect the people of Gaza, with photograph of the children, some of the children killed in Israel's bombardment in the last weeks. And, this is in keeping with the principal position that Pogba has always taken. Remember, at the end of last season, flying the Palestinian flag during the last Gaza bombardment by Israel. And it's sort of, what's remarkable about it is how unusual it is to see a player actually stepping up for Palestine. Now we see it's become a norm. Players have to, players take the knee, obviously, very importantly, and as they should. And now it's become official that players express solidarity with Ukraine, because Russia is violating all sorts of international law and norms in order to brutalize that population. And now it's become, it used to be footballers can't wave flags. And so now it's like, no, we're all backing Ukraine. And FIFA, like that, just terminates Russia from the 2022 World Cup, like without, really very much to and fro, in the way that it took probably 10 years to do with South Africa back in, in the 1960s.
And look at Roman Abramovich. I mean, fund settlers and militant extremists in Israel. It's fine, but be connected to Putin. The time to go.
Exactly, and so the question really is sort of for me, this is just one of those instances where it's a bit of a mystery to me why the BDS focus on football hasn't been more intense, because it would seem to me football is something where, yes, same with government. You're not going to rely on governments to implement BDS unless they're pushed to by their populations, right? That's the history of South Africa as well. It's not like the US or other European countries wanted to do that. They were pressed by their citizens to take action on South Africa because of structural racism and violence. So football, yes, the institutions are not going to do it, but the fans and the players, the civil society, if you like, of the game would, I think, be quite ripe to it. You saw Argentina pull out of a friendly in Israel on the way to the 2018 games in Russia because the players refused.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, you remember like Freddie Canute trying to lobby players against going to the under 21 Euros in Israel.
They're not going to play there.
But you think, Pogba is doing this, but it feels to me like it's not something you're seeing happen nearly as much as you might expect.
You're right, especially because there's such a strong track record of Israel's sort of obstruction of the Palestinian football team, violence against Palestinian soccer players, or refusing them to allow them to travel for practices or for matches. But it's a kind of similar issue with the academic boycott as well, where there's just so many examples of this particular field being impeded by Israeli policies, but there's almost no consequences sort of within that field, even though you can draw a direct line between policies of obstruction and interference and those harms and those practices. So, yeah, it seems like the players have the most power, the most ability to produce the results that you're talking about. But fans, I don't know. I mean, fans could do it too if they were organized. But the whole issue with BDS movement, I mean, it's kind of everything right now. Unfortunately, it's everything, and therefore it's nothing. The movement, even though it's over 15 years old, has not been able to sort of coalesce around narrow targets, whether it's like Coca-Cola, or a particular brand or a particular product. There's almost no strategic thinking about, let's just focus on one thing that's doable. Mm-hmm. And I think that really has set movement back. I mean, there are some local instances. What's that?
I'm just asking you quickly, like, let's pick a campaign. It's not like there's no, you can continue, but it's not like they're focusing on a particular campaign is what you're saying.
Yeah. I think the sports one does have promise because of solidarity from the players, and it's a tough call.
Yeah. I mean, nobody's expecting answers. Sean's done a lot of work actually on sort of looking at unpacking the South African experience and what can be learned, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, the argument is always made that if diplomacy or sanctions fail, what you do is like people's feeling about being part of a world, like, being a member of the international community is in the case of South Africa, by the kind of late 1980s, it was a case of like, well, we don't get the tennis, we don't get the SA Open, the SA Tennis Open. Rugby teams are not touring here anymore. Cricket teams aren't touring here anymore. So that is what that sort of puts pressure at, like, just at a sort of a social level, is like to create this impression that you're not part of the international community. But it can't happen because in other words, the Israeli teams have to be told, you're not participating in Olympics, you're not participating in UEFA anymore. But I want to get to I want to ask you one other thing, which I think is obviously more complicated. What complicates the picture about sort of the Israeli-Palestinian situation is there's also a Palestinian team. So if, like in the South African case, there's this idea of like, we would like for a South African team to represent us, not that white South African team. We would want a team that is a South African team. But here the story is, in this oppression of Palestinians, Palestine also became like some kind of entity, and it has a team, and it is also in FIFA. So that
implemented the two-state solution.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
inadvertently, Palestinian sports,
they can't boycott it in a way.
Yeah, because they actually bought into the idea that they are also a state. The sports bodies.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the ultimate reason for the two-state solution and the Oslo peace process is it's more controllable if it has this aspirations of a state. But what I like, there are these, like, on the margins at least, these friction points where Palestinian solidarity can be expressed through fanhood or fandom. Every time an Israeli team plays in the like UEFA competition, the other fans are there with the Palestinian flags, and you have some like very pro-Palestinian leaning fan bases from Celtic to Club Palestino in Chile. so these mobilizations can still mean something even if there's not a effective boycott. It used to be, when the Arab states were aligned around boycott, something like this could be more powerfully pulled off. But now, that's totally dissipated, and the UAE's, and the Saudi alliance is totally embracing Israel. And
I think from the South African experience, there's one more really important point to make, which is a parallel, which is that people underestimate the psychological impact of being boycotted by the West on settler colonial societies. Because the psychology of a settler colonial society is, and we saw this in South Africa, they literally imagined themselves as European. They used the word European as a synonym for white in South Africa in official language. And similarly, you remember when in the 2014 rocket war, for 2 days, the US stopped commercial flights into Tel Aviv, and Israel went absolutely apoplectic because basically there's this in the ruling ideology of the settler colonial system is this idea that we are an outpost of the West.
Yeah.
And if anything happens to challenge that, question that, undermine that in any way, its power is far more powerful than, it's literally when the Brooklyn Food Co-op is debating whether or not to get rid of Israeli hummus, it's not going to affect Israel's national budget, right? Yeah. But it's the psychology of that. It's like basically a whole lot of Jewish Brooklynites going, no, Israel's not something we are part of.
Yeah,
right?
you can't see British, you couldn't see British dramas. Equity boycotted South Africa.
Yeah,
so you couldn't. The actors equity. So you couldn't see British stuff on South African TV. Bill Cosby, the now infamous Bill Cosby, said no more Cosby Show for y'all. What's his name? Spike Lee said you can't see my films. That sense of like we can't do film festivals. It came down to that.
Yeah,
we can't have literary festivals. We can't have film festivals. Nobody wants to come and sing here. Then you start getting desperate. Like in the South African case, you start paying people like the Saudis are doing now with the Live Golf thing. Mm-hmm. South Africans pioneered that thing with the $1 million golf challenge at Sun City. So you start paying the world's, including Greg Norman and players like that, they had to be offered like enormous amounts of money to go there. Mm-hmm. And that sort of then starts drying up because people focus on that campaign. Like you said, you focus on a particular campaign. Mm-hmm. And so then you can't do that anymore. So it would be interesting to see if the tactics, what changes if BDS, if their tactics change and they start focusing on that. I'd be curious to see what outcomes we would see from it.
I think one factor here might be the Palestinian leadership. It's as much as it's an anointed leadership, it has a lot of power and influence, obviously, over sort of the Palestinian narrative right now, unfortunately. And they've been threatening that the two-state solution is dead for so many years, but they can't seem to break outside of the mindset of it. And that's a self sort of colonizing mindset. And although the Palestinian call for BDS, came out of civil society in 2005, if that could become the hegemonic position within the Palestinian population, I think that would be a moment that could lead to these sort of a wider mobilization towards cultural action and other kinds of isolation that are really merited here. But the Palestinian leadership is an obstacle to that. I know that that's part of the history too with South African apartheid, and we can learn how do you dislodge the sort of the henchmen who are in the way of this. I don't know. I feel like that's the first step to creating something that can garner international solidarity that's meaningful.
But do you think that in terms of like the balance of forces, I sound like an old 1980s communist now, but that the balance of forces are not there yet for people to like call them out, like to say like, for if you want, I don't know if the civil society forces that made BDS to like declare like, look, that model of politics isn't working anymore. Mm-hmm. Like maybe that I mean, this is probably the last question. like that moment hasn't arrived yet. I don't know if that makes sense. If what I'm sort of suggesting makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we have a brilliant oppressor who's just so masterful in divide and conquer, and it's like there's micro politics. This master of a sort of micro politics that allows for the creation of like corrupt patronage systems and in the right places, and so Ramallah can flourish under the PA. Gaza as this alternative politics, the Israeli government is adept at, empowering Islamic jihad against Hamas. When it's just such a insidious system of control down to the point of families and buildings and apartments, and we unfortunately got in a sense occupied and taken over by people who had lots of experience in some of the most brutal totalitarian states bringing these tactics over, and the most brutal sort of imperial states bringing those tactics over.
I would
pressed from all sides.
I would add a dimension to that which isn't often acknowledged sufficiently, which is the extent to which the U.S. and other, Western countries, but particularly the U.S., have actually played a role, a very active role in establishing and maintaining the status quo that we know now. So it's not like you have a collaborator class that's literally going to Israel for its paycheck. You have a collaborator class that, is collaborating with Israel, but it's getting paid by the EU, by US aid, etc. And there's this idea that in the name of the peace means tranquility of the status quo in the minds of that system. So the US is incredibly complicit in everything that's going on now. Like every kid that's killed right now, it's like, has the US done anything to restrain that, much less counter it? No.
Not at all. And then unfortunately the Palestinian slogan of Samud, which is about steadfastness, its mantra is so fatalistic. It's kind of like, if we just survive and we just continue to exist, one day we'll just take over. And that's not a strategy. That's unfortunately disempowering, as much as it tries to be optimistic in very abysmal circumstances. But yeah, no, absolutely. You got the U.S. against you. Now you've got Saudi Arabia and the Khalij against you, and everybody's in a way piled up on Palestinians. So it's a huge burden to even say, have some agency here, do something.
I sound stupid now. I sound stupid about Arsenal, so I sound stupid about this also. This might be a good moment to end. Well, this was great to have you on. It's incredible. I think I last saw you in Ann Arbor, or did I see you in? Yeah,
I've seen you on Zoom several times, if that counts.
Yeah, we've seen you since then also. But in any case, sort of small stories like I got Will as a grad student, and before I could see his brilliance, I left town.
Yeah. The old bait and switch, Sean. The old bait and switch.
The old bait and switch. But thanks for coming on. This was really wonderful. Great episode. Yeah.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tony.